Hello everyone, and welcome to the first part of the solutions for the stock market analysis project. Let's hop over to the exercise notebook and get started. Okay, here I am at the notebook. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. And the first part is just import the various libraries. So part 0, we're going to say import numpy as np, import pandas as pd, and since we know we're going to do visualization, we'll say import matplotlib.pyplot as plt. And in order to see the visualizations inside my Jupyter Notebook, I will say matplotlib inline. So we'll run that. And part 1 is getting the data. So as a quick note, in case you weren't able to use Pandas data reader, you can always just do read CSV and grab the Tesla stock CSV files. But we're going to walk through it with Pandas data reader. So the first thing I want to do is say import Pandas data reader. And then I'm also going to import datetime in order to set the actual dates. And then the last thing I want to do is also say import, we'll say import pandas data reader data as web. Okay, so let's start off with the start date. So the start date is going to be January 1st, 2012. So if we can zoom in one more level here. So January 1st is our start. So we'll say start is equal to datetime dot datetime, and we'll say 2012 11, and then we're going to just copy and paste this for our finish or ending date, and then that's going to be the exact same thing except instead of 2012 it'll say 2017. So once we've done that, what we're going to do is set a variable called Tesla equal to web dot data reader. The stock ticker for Tesla is capital TSLA. We'll use the Google API for this, and then we'll give it the start and end dates. Let it read that, and hopefully we should get the Tesla.head. And there it is. Looks like all our data is matching. Perfect. So now I want you to repeat the same steps to grab data for Ford and General Motors. So this is actually pretty simple. We're just going to create two more variables. We'll say Ford, set that equal to web.data reader. The ticker for Ford is F, just capital F. We'll say use the Google API and then give it the start and end dates. And we'll do the exact same thing, except instead of Ford, we'll have it be General Motors, and that ticker is GM. And then if we check out, for instance, the head of Ford, that matches up, open at $11. And if we check out the head of General Motors, matches up, opening 20.83. Okay, great. So that concludes part 1, actually getting the data. Should have been pretty straightforward. If you were having issues with Pandas data reader, you can always just use the CSV files. Moving on to part 2, visualizing the data. So what we're going to do is follow along and recreate the plots below according to the instructions and explanations. So the first thing to do is to recreate this linear plot of all the stocks' open price. So hint, for the legend, you can use the label parameter and plot legend. So that's an easy way to actually get this legend here to show nicely. And let's actually walk through that now. What we're going to do is say Tesla, that was that variable for the data frame, grab the open column, so that's the opening price, and then I'm going to plot, and I'm going to give this the label Tesla, and we'll just say fig size is equal to, let's say 12 by 8. I think this one's 16 by 8, but it doesn't really matter too much. And we'll give it the title opening prices here. So that title and that figure size is going to follow along with anything else I plot below this. So then if I do GM open, all I need to say is plot and give it its label. In this case, GM. And then I'm going to say Ford. Again, just the open column. And then I'm going to plot this one as well. So give that the label Ford. And then I need to call pl.legend in order to actually see the results of this, and call it with some open and close parentheses. So if I run this, I should get now the same plot that I saw earlier. So this is the same plot as it is here, just a different figure size. I think 16 by 8 is the actual matching figure size. So there it is. And as a quick note, if you're using Jupyter Notebook, you may get this thing right here where it says legend. If you want to not see that, I believe you should be able to just add a semicolon to the end of this, and then it will hide this output. So if we run this again, there we go. It hid that little legend output. So you can put a semicolon there to hide that. Just a little quick tip. Okay, let's continue along. And now we want to plot the volume of stock traded each day. This is actually going to be extremely similar. So what we can do is just copy and paste from this cell, because essentially what we're doing is doing the exact same task, except instead of plotting the open column, we're going to plot volume. So we'll say volume for this, and then instead of saying open prices or opening prices, we will say just volume traded. We'll switch this out for volume here, and then switch this out for volume there. Run this, and there we go. That's the total volume traded. So you can see it looks like Ford had a really big spike somewhere in late 2013. So in late 2013, you would see this huge spike. It's well above anything else. So you can see here, this is 1.5 times 10 to the power of 8. That's this line right there. If we zoom in on this line, this is above 2 times 10 to the power of 8. So this is huge. So what we want to know is, what was the date of this maximum trading volume for Ford? So this is where pandas comes into play. And then as a bonus question, what happened that day? So let's actually check this out. So in order to figure out this timestamp, what I need to do is figure out where's the maximum of the volume being traded. So let's go ahead and just do that with Ford. And what you might think to do is just get the max here. But if you just do max, that's going to return the actual amount. So ended up returning back how many units of stock were actually traded, 220 million. If I want the actual date, I need to use argmax. Then it returns back that it was December 18th of 2013. Now to answer the bonus question as far as actually what happened this day, all you need to do is essentially Google search Ford plus this date, so 2013 December 18th, and you'll end up getting a bunch of news articles, and there's links in the solutions notebook that say things like aggressive Ford plan to hit profits, shares fall. So what ended up happening is that day or the day before, Ford basically made an announcement that the cost of launching new products would cut into next year's profits. So that ended up causing a big sell-off, and you can see the big sell-off happening on that particular day. And if you kind of take a look at Ford by itself, so if you take a look at Ford's opening price, and then plot that, let's give this a fig size of, let's just say, I don't know, 20 by 6. If we take a look at that actual date, it's kind of late 2013, you'll end up seeing the drop right here. Now, in context of this entire huge time period, it's not actually such a huge drop, so it's not as noticeable as the spike here, so keep that in mind. And what's fun to do is kind of take a look at these other spikes and see how it corresponds with the actual dips. So you can see there's a much larger dip kind of in mid-2014. So if we take a look at mid-2014 over here, we end up seeing a little spike here. So not as significant as this large spike. So just kind of interesting things to check out as you're kind of playing around and visualizing this data. Okay, so the open price time series visualization, that is, if we look all the way back at this first one, right here, where we see Tesla's huge stock price versus General Motors and Ford kind of laying flat. That visualization makes it look like Tesla's always been much more valuable as a company than General Motors and Ford. But to really understand this, what you actually need to think about is the total market cap of the company. That is, not just the stock units themselves, but the stock price multiplied by how many available units of stock there are. That's the market cap of the company. So our current data doesn't actually have information of total units of stock in the company. It just has volume traded. So what we're going to do is just, as a really simple calculation, try to represent the total money traded. That's going to be multiplying the volume column by the opening price. And remember, this still is not the actual market cap. It's just a visual representation of the total amount of money being traded. So basically, 100 units of stock at $10 each versus 100,000 units of stock at $1 each. Just how much money is actually being traded for each of these companies on these given days. So first off, I wanted you to create a new column for each data frame called total traded, which is the opening price multiplied by the volume traded. And this is not a real technical analysis, so we usually wouldn't do something like this. This is mostly just to explore your Panda skills. So we'll say Tesla total traded and we'll set that equal to Tesla, the open price of the column, and then we'll say Tesla, the total volume traded. So essentially what we're doing is we're trying to get an idea of more or less how much money was actually traded. Now again, this is not an exact calculation because the opening price is not the average price for that day. You can do a lot better estimations than what I'm doing here. Again, this is kind of just to practice our panda skills. So we're going to copy and paste this and do this for the other two. So that's going to be Ford, it's going to be Ford, and this is going to be Ford. And then this last one's going to be General Motors, General Motors, General Motors. Okay, so we have 3 total traded, and now we're going to plot this against the time index. So all we're going to do is basically copy this total traded column, and then say dot plot, and we'll give this the label Tesla, and let's give this the fig size 16 by 8. And then we'll say General Motors, total traded, plot that with the label GM, and we'll then say Ford, total traded. I'm just using tab to autocomplete there, and we'll give that the label Ford. Let's add in our legend, PLT legend, and then let's put a semicolon there. Okay, so this is essentially a visualization of the total amount of money being traded. So now you can see that Tesla is a lot closer throughout many of the actual years. Now there is a huge spike for Tesla. So on this particular day, there's a huge amount of money being traded for Tesla, which we can explore later on. But as far as the difference between this particular visualization, and if we scroll back up this particular visualization, the actual amount of money being traded is a lot different. So again, the opening price, the actual individual price per stock unit, is quite different between Tesla, General Motors, and Ford. But again, this doesn't do a good representation of total market cap. Now, total market cap is not something we can actually get from the data we have at hand here. All we have are the open, high, low, close prices and volume, but we can kind of get some sort of idea doing kind of this crude calculation of open price times volume. This is, again, not a market cap, but more of the discussion on how much actual money is being traded each day for each of these companies. And you can see here that for a lot of these days, a lot of money is being traded around for all of the companies. Now Tesla, again, quite a bit more money being traded around, especially during certain years when it was being shorted a lot for various reasons. But Tesla is also kind of a crazy company when it comes to its stock price, so just keep that in mind. So going around, what we're going to do is continue on. And if you keep continuing on and scrolling down, you'll end up seeing it says, interesting, looks like there was a huge amount of money traded for Tesla somewhere in early 2014. So that's this number right here. You can see there's a huge amount of money somewhere in early 2014 that's being traded. So what we want to do is, what was that date and what actually happened? We are actually going to do a really similar thing to what we did earlier. We'll just say Tesla, grab the total traded column, and then I'm going to ask for argmax. And that should return February 25th of 2014. So what actually happened that date? Well, if you end up Google searching this date plus Tesla, you end up finding news like this where it says Wall Street Journal, Tesla shares surge on Morgan Stanley report. So essentially what happened is some Morgan Stanley analyst gave a good report on Tesla shares. So that caused a huge spike that particular day. So what we're also going to do is practice plotting out some moving averages. So I want you to plot out the moving average 50 and then moving average 200. So let's go ahead and do that. That's going to be actually quite straightforward. We'll just do this for General Motors, not all the stocks, as it says in the instructions. So we'll say General Motors, call it MA50, that is the 50-day moving average, is equal to GM, open, and all I have to do is call the rolling method on this, 50, and then ask for the mean. And it's kind of up to you whether you want to set this as a new column or not, but setting this as a new column in the original data frame allows us to kind of do a nice little call at the end and get the legend automatically. So then this one's going to be moving average 200, and that will be equal to GM, the open column, rolling 200 days. That's quite a large window, just keep that in mind, this is more for visualization purposes. And then let's actually just pass in a list of columns. So we're going to pass in a list of columns. We'll say open, MA50, and then MA 200. And then we're going to plot this and give the label, actually we don't need any label really. We'll just say fig size is equal to 16 by 8. So let's run this, and we should see the same plot result here. So we can see the opening price, which is blue, the moving average for 50-day moving average, kind of getting that trend, and then the even more macro trend, which is the 200-day moving average. Okay, so again, quite a large window of 200 days, a little more for visualization purposes. But you never know, certain technical analysis techniques require really large windows. So finally, what we're going to do is see if there's a relationship between these stocks. After all, they're all related to the car industry in some form or another. So we can actually do this easily through a scatter matrix plot. So what I want you to do is import scatter matrix from pandas.plotting and use it to create a scatter matrix plot of all the stocks' opening price. Now, something you may need to do is rearrange the columns into a single data frame. And there's some hints and info, so if you check out this link, there's hints and info on how to actually use the scatter matrix plot. So you can come over here to the actual documentation, and it'll describe how to actually use scatter matrix and give you some visualization examples as it loads up there. Let's hop over to the Jupyter Notebook and actually do this ourselves. So we need to say from pandas.plotting import scatter matrix. So I will import that, and then I'm going to create a variable called car companies, and I'm going to just concatenate a couple things. I'm going to concatenate the open column of Tesla, and then the open column of General Motors, and then the open column of Ford. And I want to do this along axis is equal to 1. Because, whoops, x equal to 1. And if I just take a quick look at what I've done by checking out the head of this, I essentially just concatenated 3 open columns here. So Tesla, General Motors, and Ford. So this actually doesn't have any column names yet. They're all open, so let's change that. They're all still in the correct order that I concatenated them, Tesla, General Motors, Ford. So let's define this as car columns, and we'll say Tesla open, General Motors open, and then Ford open. We'll run that, and now if I see car companies, the head of it, I get this nice little Tesla open, General Motors open, and Ford open. And now what we're going to do is just use a scatter matrix to create this plot right here. So we're going to say scatter matrix, pass in our data frame, which is that car company data frame. And we can set the fig size to really whatever you want. I'll just say 8 by 8. If you're not as zoomed in as me, you won't need to do that. And I'm just going to run this, and we'll go over a few more arguments. So if you just run that, you end up seeing kind of this big thing of array telling you the matplotlib axes, and then you get something that looks like this. So there's a couple things you can do with this. I'm going to zoom out just a second so we can see the whole scatter matrix plot. We can see that there's a clear positive correlation between General Motors and Ford. Tesla is quite a bit different, has some different behavior, and that makes sense because we saw there was kind of a huge jump in Tesla's stock price while General Motors and Ford kind of stayed at the same level in comparison. What you can do to kind of get a better idea of this scatter plot is add an alpha variable. So we'll say alpha is equal to, and let's just say 0.2 because we're dealing with a lot of data points here. And now it's going to appear much darker where there's more points stacked on top of each other. So that's something you can do. And if you want to actually add in more bars to this histogram, what you end up doing is you add in as an argument HIST underscore KWDS. And this is going to be a dictionary. And what this dictionary represents is these are histogram keywords based off matplotlib's own histogram. So what you end up doing is you go to matplotlib's documentation, check out the keyword arguments for using a histogram of matplotlib, and you can pass these in as a dictionary. So the one we are concerned with is bins. So that's the parameter, colon, as the value you give it the key you want. So 50 bins. And I think I misspoke. I said the key you want. You just want to give it the value you want, not the key. The key is bins. Value is 50. And if you want to get rid of this array, you can just use a semicolon again here. And there's our scatter matrix. And that basically concludes part 2. There is a bonus visualization task, but we'll do that in a separate lecture. That was the main visualization tasks you had to do for this exercise. Coming up next, we'll tackle this bonus visualization task, and then we'll move on to part 3, basic financial analysis. If you have any questions, feel free to post them to the Q&A forums, but also make sure to check out the solutions notebook for the full code and explanations. I'll see you at the next lecture.